Hello, Telesur English presents a new episode of China Now, a Wave Media's production that showcases the culture, technology and politics of the Asian giant. In this first segment, China Currents dives into the top stories of the week, like Africa highlighting that Taiwan is part of China and the Asian giant's incursion into space solar panel technology. Let's take a look.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started.
Welcome to China Currents, your weekly news report on the latest developments in China. I'm Mimi, and in this episode, China warns Walmart. South Africa highlights Taiwan is part of China. China's breakthrough on space solar panel technology. First, let's explore how Beijing has warned Walmart. On March 12th, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce issued a stern warning to Walmart. The root cause traces back to Trump's new tariff war. On March 3rd, the US announced 2 additional tariff hikes totaling 20% on Chinese goods. And by March 6th, Reuters revealed that Walmart was demanding that Chinese textile suppliers implement an immediate 10% price cut, followed by phased reductions totaling 20%. This clearly showed Walmart's attempt to fully transfer Trump-induced losses to Chinese suppliers. Chinese official media immediately pointed out that this was disrupting the market order. Actually, public data that is well known to anyone involved in international trade shows that Walmart's actions are essentially robbery rather than business negotiation. According to statistics from the China National Garment Association, the average profit margin in China's textile industry in 2024 was only 3.9%. Walmart's overall 20% price reduction effectively forces Chinese companies to deliver products at a 16.1% loss. Most people might interpret a 16% loss to mean, I have invested $1 million to set up a factory and lose $160,000 in a year. However, this 16% refers to the loss per production cycle. In the textile and apparel industry, the process, which starts from purchasing raw materials to the finished product leaving the factory, is known as the production cycle. For example, in the apparel and bag categories commonly sold at Walmart, each batch is delivered within 20 to 45 days. If we assume an average of 30 days per cycle, this means there are 12 cycles in a year, leading to an annualized loss rate of 87.66%. By the end of the year, an investment valued at $1 million would be worth less than $130,000. In China, the more competitive the apparel companies, the higher the automation in their production lines, and the shorter the production cycle. Take China's best-known Chinese clothing manufacturer, Shenzhou International, who works closely with Nike, Lululemon, and many others. Its Ningbo factory can achieve delivery in as little as 15 days, which is twice as fast as the international standard. This means that if Chinese companies accept Walmart's demands, the more competitive they are, the greater their losses, a situation that completely defies market principles. Retail Insight Network noted that Walmart has a long-standing approach of aggressively minimizing purchase costs to sustain its market leadership position, which already pushed Chinese suppliers to operate on razor-thin margins. In fact, any reduction beyond 2% could cause these manufacturers to incur losses. For companies primarily engaged in export trade, fluctuations in exchange rates and changes in payment cycles can significantly affect profit margins. With an original profit margin of only 3.9%, Chinese companies are barely staying afloat. And as the world's largest retailer, Walmart cannot possibly be unaware of this fact. CNN points out that many businesses are struggling under Trump's chaotic tariff announcements, including retailers. However, This criticism essentially serves as a cover-up for Walmart. According to Walmart's financial report released in February 2025, it has enjoyed a healthy top line in fiscal 2025, with its sales, profit, and earnings surpassing expectations in the fourth quarter of financial year 25, with its gross margin rate improved by 53 basis points. It is expected that net sales for fiscal year 2026 will grow at a similar rate of 3% to 4%. Clearly, Walmart is not in any difficulty. Rather, under the guise of an industry downturn, it is pushing Chinese companies into a desperate situation. This unnecessary malice immediately prompted a meeting with the Chinese government, who warned that if Walmart insists on having suppliers cut prices, then what awaits Walmart is not just talk. Walmart holds no real leverage over China, but remains heavily dependent on it. Its financial report acknowledged that the growth was principally driven by Chinese, Mexican, and Canadian markets. Moreover, Fox News has pointed out that 60% of Walmart's supply chain depends on China. This is why, on the 13th of March, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce stated that Walmart's threats and intimidation would backfire. As the Global Times commented, without Chinese suppliers, more than half of Walmart's shelves would be empty. Walmart's slogan is "Save money, live better." But while saving money from Chinese suppliers, do American people really live better? According to The Sun, in February 2025, Walmart's egg prices were raised to $15 per dozen, and American customers are even taking out loans just to afford a bite of an egg. Now it appears that platforms like Shein and Temu, which enable American consumers to spend less while protecting Chinese suppliers from extortion, might actually be the ones more deserving of the slogan, "Save money, live better." Next up, the Taiwan question. On March 16th, according to Global Times, South Africa has officially renamed the Taipei Liaison Office as the Taipei Commercial Office on its website. South African media outlet IOL described the renaming as more accurately reflecting the role and nature of the office. The office was originally established in Pretoria, one of South Africa's capital cities. On October 7th of last year, the South African government demanded that the office relocate without offering any room for negotiation. South African officials argued that since the relationship between South Africa and Taiwan only involves unofficial economic and cultural exchanges, the office should be situated in Johannesburg, the country's economic hub, rather than Pretoria, its political center. Before the renaming, the office facilitated cooperation between Taiwan and South Africa in economic, academic, technological, and cultural fields, performing functions akin to those of an embassy. Being in South Africa's political center also allowed it to handle the exchanges with other African countries, including Rwanda, Kenya, and Zambia. The recent renaming, however, clearly restricts Taiwan's activities exclusively to commercial affairs, prohibiting all unrelated activities. On the 13th of March, Taiwan regional leader Lai Ching-te falsely claimed that Taiwan is a sovereign and independent nation. But among Africa's 54 real sovereign states, only Eswatini is still maintaining relations with the Taiwan separatist authorities for money. According to a report done by Global Times, in 2018 alone, Taiwan allocated over $41 million in aid to Eswatini, most of which reportedly benefited the royal family. For instance, Taiwan spent approximately $1.7 million to sponsor fireworks and celebrations for the Eswatini king's birthday party in 2018. Furthermore, Eswatini's Observer newspaper reported that Taiwan's China Airlines provided King Mswati III with an Airbus A340-300 private jet and services worth about $13 million, despite the aircraft's market cost exceeding $200 million. On the other hand, currently, Over 60% of Eswatini's population remains in extreme poverty, with less than 10% of the country being arable land. However, while Taipei is trying to buy fake diplomatic relations, China is using its actions to gain true friendship within the global south. For example, in 2023, a Chinese naval hospital ship provided free medical services to over 10,000 residents in Honiara, the capital of the Solomon Islands. In 2024, Solomon Islands Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare publicly praised China for its significant contributions to the country's economic development, noting that even during decades of ties with Taipei, the nation had continuously struggled economically. On the other hand, Lithuania had swallowed the bitter consequences of provoking China's red line. In 2021, Lithuania, disregarding China's strong protest and repeated representations, allowed the setup of a Taiwanese representative office in Lithuania. This act openly created the false impression of one China, one Taiwan. As a response, China's imports from Lithuania have been greatly reduced. From 2021 to 2023, the GDP growth of Lithuania has dropped from 6.4% to 0.3%. As of 2024, over 60% of Lithuanians believe that the government should not interfere in China's internal affairs. Lithuania Prime Minister Gintautas Paluckas admitted that was a grave diplomatic mistake. Moving on March 17th, China's Shenyang Aerospace University unveiled a groundbreaking design for a space solar power station. The proposed system involves collecting solar energy in space, converting it into electricity, and transmitting it to Earth via microwaves, thereby providing continuous 24-hour clean energy. The concept of an SSPS was first introduced by American scientist Peter Glaser, but for half a century it remained purely theoretical. In contrast, the Chinese research team has now presented a comprehensive implementation plan, covering the entire process from ground-based experiments to space deployment. They have achieved significant technological breakthroughs in engineering design, solar energy collection, and power transmission, moving this previously science fiction concept closer to reality. Additionally, Chinese scientists have proposed space solar power solutions as part of a broader strategy that includes space mining. According to a report from Guancha on March 16th, China University of Mining and Technology successfully developed China's first space mining robot. This robot effectively completed walking, anchoring, and sampling operations in simulated lunar surface conditions. Researchers stated that the experiments accurately replicated the moon's environment. While Chinese scientists pursue peaceful space exploration and innovation, aiming at breakthroughs that could benefit humanity, the United States perceives space as a battlefield with China, even considering advanced weaponry designed to disable adversaries' satellites. However, Chinese researchers have refused to be drawn into the Star War. Instead, their numerous scientific breakthroughs demonstrate China's commitment to opening new frontiers in space, actively contributing to space civilization for all of mankind. That's all for today. Thank you so much for watching this episode of China Currents. If you have any thoughts or comments, please reach us at our email address. See you next time.
We have a short break now, but don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to China Now. Today, Thinkers Forum welcomes Chris Young together with Guy Metten, Swiss freelance journalist and political scientist. Let's see.
Welcome to Thinkers Forum. Today we have an honored guest, Mr. Guy Metton from Switzerland, who is a Swiss journalist and politician, a member of the Swiss People's Party. So welcome, Mr. Guy Metton.
Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, thank you.
What motivated you to write that piece, that geopolitical incompetence of Europeans? Why were the European leaders incompetent?
There are many reasons for the geopolitical European incompetence, but the main for me the main problem is the Europeans has lost the grip on the, let's say, on the international scene, not now but since at least 10 years, 12 years. It's not new. It's a consequence of an already, let's say, not long story, but a decade, let's say like that, a decade story. So they lost the possibility to have a weight on the international scene.
What was the landmark event that happened 10 or 20 years ago?
Oh, for me, it was the Maidan coup, the Maidan revolution in Ukraine in 2014. There were many, let's say, it started in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference when President Putin asked the Europeans and the NATO countries not to include Ukraine and Georgia. Mm-hmm. And what was the result? At the time, it was in 2008, 1 year later, NATO proposed to Ukraine and Georgia to become a member of NATO. It was humiliating for the Russians because Putin had asked, please, it's a red line for us, don't do that. It was not the first time. The Russian has already said that since the 90s, since the Gorbachev-Bush negotiations 15 years ago. So that was the first, let's say, signal, the first event. And after that, there was the Georgia war. Georgian President Saakashvili attacked the Russian troop in Ossetia in August 2008 when Mr. Putin was assisting to the opening of the Beijing Olympic Games in August 28. That was the second hit for the Russians. And after that, tensions were growing. And the Europeans were more or less careful during this time. They say, no, we don't so agree. We should wait for Ukraine membership in NATO. But they didn't stop it properly. And after that, with the Ukraine coup, the Ukraine Orange Revolution, let's say like that, in 2014, they entered and they lost the grip because they accepted the coup, even if Mrs. Nuland, Victoria Nuland, the assistant US Secretary General, when she said to his ambassador, Jeffrey Piat, when she said, fuck the EU, it was tough for the Europeans, but they didn't react. They said, but why? Why she's doing? She's insulting us.
So how should EU react? How should EU react?
Nothing.
Now, how in your view, how should the Europeans react?
They should say, but please don't insult us. We are Europeans. You are in Europe, and so we are Europeans. So we have to. They had to say to Mrs. Nuland, but you cannot say that. It's insulting for us.
I mean, on a broader context,
put the Americans a little bit, to say no to the Americans, and secondly, to be in the front in Ukraine. If you remember, in February 2014, the European ministers, Mr. Steinmeier, who is actually president of Germany, he was foreign minister at the time, French foreign minister, Mr. Fabius, they signed an agreement with the Ukrainian president accepting for elections, for smooth change and a smooth adaptation. But it was completely destroyed by the actions of the Americans. And the Europeans stayed, oh yes, they accepted without a word. And it was a missed opportunity, you know, to affirm, to assert themselves and to say to the Americans, we will be in charge. And after, with the Minsk agreement, they signed the agreement, the same ones with the Germans and the French, Russian and Donbass region and Ukrainians, but they did anything. The Europeans did anything to support the implementation of the Minsk agreement. Mm-hmm. So, if you are dismissed, you know, if you do nothing after that, 10 years later, you are completely sidelined, and you cannot ask to be suddenly at the first place for negotiations, you know. So that was this kind of missed opportunities. And the other problem of the Europeans, in my view, that's the, let's say, the incompetent leadership. I am very yes, critical with that, because all the European presidents, if you look at them, they have no awareness about their own history. They don't know the history of Ukraine. They don't know even their own history, of their own national history, let's say, because they are young, let's say, MBA or business MBA. They have a formation, an education without the basic historical. And
so, how did this class of leaders come into power? These MBAs.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, for me, typical of this formation are the Canadian First Minister, Mr. Trudeau, or the French President, Mr. Macron. You know, because they came from the business, they are, but they are able to speak. They are very good speakers. Mm-hmm. You know, in our type of democracy, if you master your speech, that's a power, and they are able to sell. You know, they are marketing managers. They are champions of marketing, but they have not the backbone. You know, the backbone and the historical perspective to be able to understand the full context, and that's the problem. One of the problem of this kind of leadership.
Let's assume that there is this totally competent European leader with backbone. So how should he? What policies? What kind of strategy should he pursue now in the face of the Russian-Ukraine crisis?
The Europeans, you mean?
And the Europeans, yes, the EU leaders.
Yeah. No, they react. The good thing is now yes, they seem to react, because but it's a little bit what I call the kerosene diplomacy. You know, the kerosene diplomacy, it's organizing summits. They organized 2 summits a week. Last week there were 2 summits, one in Paris, one in London, and now there is another one in Brussels, you know. So every week they organize summits. Kerosene, you know, they take planes for a summit. But the problem, you don't solve the security problem in Europe and the war in Ukraine with summits, with kerosene. You have to accept the idea accepted the world has changed, the context has changed. There is a new presidency in America. There are new, let's say, collaboration, for instance, between Russia and China. So they are not yet aware of that. You know, for instance, it's not, the problem is not to gather, is to have a plan and to have a strategy, but they have no strategy. And that's the problem. To build a strategy, you have to understand the full context. And in my view, it's not yet the case. They are beginning to do it, but it's completely new. They are they began to do it since 2 weeks or 3 weeks,
Okay.
and it's a little bit late.
Right.
But I hope they will succeed because if you ask me, for me, the strategic goal of Europe should be the strategic autonomy of the European continent, of the European countries. It should be economic, strategic independence. It should be security, strategic independence or autonomy. It should be also political independence. If you are completely submitted, if you are completely vassalized by the United States, you have no autonomy. So now the goal of the European leaders should be to recreate a strategic autonomy. For instance, in developing relations with China. It could be, as there are intentions with Russia. The problem of Europe, they fight against Russia in Ukraine, they fight against China because some economic rivalry and also under the influence of the US. And now, since 1 month, they are also fighting against America, against United States. But it's impossible. Europe alone cannot fight against three adversaries.
Okay.
They have to choose. But the problem, they have not yet understood. They are starting to understand.
Right. So that
And
was a
there is an
very
opportunity for China, in my view, for China and for Europeans
to engage.
to develop some closer ties together, because Europeans were very reluctant to develop the close tie with China these last years. But now, thanks to the new context and thanks to let's say, the tensions between Europeans and Trump, there is an opportunity.
So, okay, now it's a very dynamic time. So, shall we look at these ties independently, the EU, US, EU, Russia, and EU, China ties independently? And also, I want to discuss firstly the US and EU split, if you allow me to call it a split. Do you think it will be permanent, or do you think it's a Republican Democrat thing? Do you think the next administration, probably Democrats, will come into power and repair the transatlantic relationship?
I think the transatlantic relations between Europe and the United States are very strong. It's 1 century long, let's say, since the First World War. Not so strong after the First World War until to the Second World War. But since 1945, these relations are very strong. And in my view, they cannot be cut, in fact, because everything, these relations are not only a problem of interest or economic interest, they are, but not only. It's also cultural, it's also historical, it's also, in music, in theater, in movies, in
Civilizational
economy, everything, let's say like that. So I think you cannot cut that, and the split will not. Tensions will occur, as we say. Tensions can maybe go deeper. It's possible, but they will not cease. They will not be interrupted. And I am sure also for the Americans have no interest to cut completely with Europe, because what they are trying to do, they are trying to make a new Yalta, a new, distribution of areas of influence in the world, with Russia now, maybe with China soon, I don't know, but possible. But Europeans, they are allied of United States. And United States business need the Europeans. For instance, all the digital economy is dominated in Europe by the US. All the Google, all the Californian giants in digital, they are American. And America, it's billions, it's hundreds of billions of dollars, So they cannot miss this market. And also for security, the goal of Mr. Trump is to sell weapons to the Europeans and also some energy, but mainly now weapons, And that's why I think this relation will stay maybe a little bit troubled like that, but will not be cut. But there is, in my view, if you let me see from here, now the axis of the world has completely shifted to Asia. In my view, you have a big axis with Russia and China. That's the main axis of the world. And the collaboration between these two powers is now structuring the new world, the coming new world order. And I think this axis is now solid because there is an experience. The economies are complementary between Russia and China. The friendship between the president is also, and the trust between them is also there. And now it's the first time in the history that a Eurasian continent is playing together. There were always wars, in Eurasia, made by the British Empire, by other powers. And now the Eurasian continent works together with Russia, China, Iran. The Americans, they left Afghanistan, so now they cannot play, they cannot divide, they cannot. And that's why this axis is very strong, but it will be stronger and stronger because it's an axis with two propellers now. You have one propeller, it could be, I speak for the future, one propeller could be the new relations between USA and Russia. But Russia is still there. And the second propeller could be China and Europe. So you have the Asian or Eurasian, Russian, Chinese axis and two propellers, let's say with two horizontal axes, Russia, US, and China, Europe, can be built. Just an image but this is quite new in the history of the humankind, let's say like that. And it could be very strong. And then it's also interesting because the approach is different. It's not a domination. The problem of the United States now is that they absolutely want to be the world leader, to dominate, to be the hegemon of the world, the only power, yes, the superpower, and the other ones they should follow. But now it will not be possible to do that. It's yes, a double axis and also a four, let's say, a multipolar four with four poles, let's say like that. And with maybe India, Arabic country, Africa, South America, but in the second row. And that's new. And I think the Europeans, they are so self-centered. If I speak with our leaders and our media and so, they didn't take consciousness of the existence of this new axis, of this shift. They believe they are still the center of the world. But now Europe, for me, is a small part, maybe important, maybe rich, and so on. But it's only, a small part of the world. It's not more the center. They have to accept this idea, and that's the problem. And that's why they are incompetent. To answer your question, they are geopolitically incompetent because they should accept this new reality to rebuild something and to rebuild their capacity to weigh on the international affairs, and including with Ukraine.
So you have actually suggested a multipolar world, and interestingly, the U.S., which has been very long reluctant to accept the multipolarity, But Marco Rubio remarked that the world has already moved into multipolarity. So now you're saying the European leaders, by and large, have failed to realize that the world has already moved on. They are stuck in the past. Okay, so given that's the case, I yeah, the European leaders. So, given that's the case, I wonder what is going to be Europe's reaction toward Russia and China, and now the U.S. is retreating back to the American continent. How will Europe react to the new security arrangement? Because Europe are made of individual countries like the Baltic states and countries like Poland who might have legitimate security concerns for Russia. Do you think Russia, because okay, the narrative is the European or Western narrative is after Russia has conquered parts of Ukraine, it will move on to conquer many parts in Eastern Europe and the Baltic countries. Do you think that could be a reality, or should Europe be fearful of Russia?
In my view, no.
Mhm.
Because they built a narrative since 10 years now, describing and presenting Russia as a global threat, as a vital threat, existential threat against them. But in fact, that's not true.
Mhm.
In fact, there were no problem with Ukraine until the Maidan revolution in 2014. So, and Russia did not invade any European country. There were some tensions locally, let's say, because of some Russian nationality minorities in Transnistria or Ossetia, but it was, let's say, localized. It was not global, and it was frozen, all this conflict. The problem came with the NATO, when NATO decided to expand and to expand in the Eastern Europe, despite the promises given to President Gorbachev in 1991. That was the main problem. But the Europeans didn't speak about that. They didn't, they present NATO as a peaceful military organization. It's an oxymoron. If you are military, it was a military alliance which became offensive, not defensive. Remember, NATO attacked Serbia in 1999 and they bombed the Chinese embassy there in Belgrade. It was also the case in Libya. So in Iraq, Afghanistan, there were NATO battalions there. So that was in fact, the problem. But they presented that as, a response to a non-existing a supposed Russian threat, which was not the case. Now, that's another difficulty for the European, because in my view, they are self-intoxicated by their own propaganda. The narrative is, oh, that's the bad Russian beer, he will attack us. But in case it was a fake, fake, and now they have to de-intoxicate themselves, which is always difficult in my view. There is the problem in Ukraine. That's clear. And
you have just mentioned a very
also,
interesting. You have mentioned an interesting case, the NATO, because the NATO was created in response to the Soviet Union, but the Warsaw Pact was dissolved, where NATO still expands eastward. So, why is that the case? So, who created? You're suggesting that NATO is the one created Russophobia, propaganda that Russia is the big threat. But what was the strategic aim of that? Why Europe shouldn't follow this American strategic aim?
Yeah, after the collapse of USSR in 91, normally, yes, the Warsaw Pact was dismantled, and normally NATO should also disappear. It was discussed at the time. But what happened? They maintained NATO, and after that, let's say, the neoconservatives elites in Washington that took the grip and they decide, oh, we won the Cold War, United States won the Cold War, and now we should be able to be the only hegemonic power in the world. China was rising, but not at the first place at the time. And so USSR disappeared. They were alone. And this is the main reason why they kept NATO in standby in the first time, and after that developing and also expanding to the, if you read the Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski book, you know, The Great Chessboard, written in 95, or the Paul Wolfowitz doctrine in 92. He was the assistant defense minister of United States, Paul Wolfowitz. All these guys developed theories saying if we wish to be the dominating power in the world, we should we cannot have rivals. We should destroy any rival. So we had to be sure that USSR or Russia will never come back at the first place. And that's why it's written in the book, you know, we should dismantle Ukraine, we should take the grip on Ukraine, because Ukraine is the pivot country for Russian power. So if we can split Ukraine and Russia, Russia will never come back on the first place in the world. That was written. And that's why they keep NATO. That's why they expand NATO. That's why they after they propose, as I said, Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO. That was a plan, let's say like that.
Yes.
If you look back, if you take the movie from the beginning. And now it's the end of this Russia with this intervention in Ukraine. It stops this, let's say, Western NATO expansions. And now the New Deal is coming on the scene. And as I said, with a new axis of the world. But it will take time for everybody understands the new condition.
Yes. Because looking back at it, it feels a little bit tragic, because that's tragic because when you talk about playing the chess game, who's the player? The only player is the US, where Europe is the chessboard. Europe is a piece of chessboard. It's just a piece of geographical feature in which the chess player plays, and that's tragic.
They are accustomed to play chess with the black and the white pawns, you know, and Europe was just pawns on the chessboard.
Yes. So now the world is moving to a more balanced game between multiple poles.
Exactly, right? But it's very hard to the previous, let's say, leaders to accept.
Of leaders, yes. My very wild question: do you think Europe will stay intact? I mean, it will keep itself together, or will break into conflicts among, especially if America withdraws its security guarantee, security support of the Europeans? The European nations will have to come out with their own defense. If that's the case, do you think the security competition will come back to the continent of Europe, which have haunted Europe for millennium? Because European history is filled with wars. Do you think that might come back again? Do you think?
I don't think so, to be frank. There are many divisions, many disagreements between Europeans, as we can say, for instance, between now the Hungarians and Slovaks and the other ones. That's the case, and it will continue. But let's say maybe in history, a little bit more deep in the history. I wrote a book also called The Lost Continent. The Lost Continent is Europe in my... And I was explaining why Europe is fragile. Because it's fragile because after the First and Second World War, it was a civil war, let's say, a civil European war, half of the Europe against half the other one in 1914 and also in 1940 or 39, yes. And the Europeans were very conscious of the problem and they said, never again. We should avoid that. It was good decision. And we will do it creating European Union and economic union and so on. It was pretty successful in terms of economy, but not so successful in terms of politics, because they emphasized the economic side and not so much the political. And the dependence with the United States in terms of security was also big with NATO. So the construction is okay, but also very fragile and incomplete, because the political and the security pillar are lacking. Now, with the new context, there is and if Europeans will not be able to add these two pillars, politic and military, European will split. Maybe not in wars. I don't think so, because now it's pretty much integrated, But it will be a small, a slow decline, let's say like that, kind of decline, decadence, let's say. But there is an opportunity to rebuild this independence with the political and the security pillar. They started yesterday. They decided to invest in defense, which is a good. But it depends. Everything is depending on how they will do it. Because if they spend $800 billion to buy American weapons, what is where is the independence? Yes. Where is if it is with local or European industries, that's okay, with interoperability and so on. Everything is depending on how the goal, is made, is.
So
and
much
that's
is,
not yet clear. That's not yet clear.
Right. So much is uncertain.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much is uncertain depending on how the conflict will be resolved. But it seems to be that your principle is that Europe should stay united and to be a collective but also independent, autonomous player in the world.
Exactly. In my view, yes.
Yes.
That's it means they should also come to an agreement with Russia, because Europe cannot develop properly itself when she is in war with Russia, through Ukraine. It's not possible because it will take too much money, cost too big. It will be too costly and so on. So the problem in Ukraine should be resolved. And normally, Europeans should be able to be part on the general security, a new security architecture, which has never been done since 30 years, since the collapse of USSR. But maybe now, with the new conditions, there is an opportunity, and I hope they will seize it. But with the actual leadership, I am pretty skeptical. But maybe a good surprise could occur. Yeah, I hope so. As a European, I hope so.
Yes. So,
and they could also use China, as a counter balance. Same for China, could also use European as a partner.
Yes.
And so that's why there are some opportunities also for our both parts of the world, as you are in China now.
So cautious optimism for the future, which is very uncertain. Okay, thank you for that. As much as I want you to go on elaborating more about China-Europe opportunity, We are running out of time, and it's already 1 hour segment. So I thank you again for your contribution today, and I hope we carry on our conversation in the future to talk about mainly, I think, about European and especially Switzerland cooperation with China.
No, with pleasure. So I am grateful to you. It's always a pleasure to speak with Chinese friends.
We welcome you to our institute at Fudan University.
And this was another episode of China Now, a show that opens a window to the present and future of the Asian giant. Hope you enjoyed and see you next time.